London was scheduled to be erased from the map by a machine hidden 500 feet beneath the hills of northern France. There were no bombers in the sky, no fleet on the horizon, and no warning sirens wailing in the streets. Yet every hour, 600 high-explosive shells were designed to rain down on the British capital, launched from a weapon so massive it could not be moved. So secret it was built into the very bones of the earth. This was not a dream of the future. It was a concrete reality nearly completed in the final desperate years of the Second World War. To this day, the hollowed-out limestone of Mimoyecques remains a silent witness to a mechanical obsession that attempted to rewrite the laws of ballistics and the fate of nations. Deep within the French countryside, near the village of Landreton-le-Nord, the ground holds a scar that refuses to heal. In 1943, thousands of tons of concrete were poured into the earth, creating a subterranean fortress that defied logic. The project was so sensitive that its name was hidden behind layers of bureaucracy, known only as the high-pressure pump or the Busy Lizzie. The goal was simple, yet terrifying: to build a cannon with a barrel 130 meters long. It was a weapon of vengeance, the third of its kind, designed to strike at the heart of an empire from across the sea. The sheer scale of the ambition was matched only by the darkness of the shadows it cast over the engineers who labored in its depths. The design of the V3 was a radical departure from everything known about artillery. Traditional cannons relied on a single explosion to propel a shell, but the laws of physics dictated that a barrel could only withstand so much pressure. The solution proposed by the technical minds of the era was a series of lateral chambers arranged like the ribs of a prehistoric beast. As the shell traveled up the smooth-bore barrel, secondary charges would ignite in perfect sequence, kicking the projectile faster and faster until it reached supersonic speeds. It was a rhythmic, mechanical pulse of fire that aimed to hurl a 100-kilogram shell over a distance of 160 kilometers. The physics were theoretical, the engineering was experimental, and the stakes were existential. Walking through the remnants of those tunnels today, the air feels heavy with a cold, damp stillness. The walls are thick, reinforced with steel and stone to withstand the very vibrations of the weapon they were meant to house. The silence in these corridors is not the silence of peace, but the silence of a tomb. There is a sense that the machines are still there, ghost-like, waiting for a command that will never come. The limestone galleries were designed to operate like a factory of death, with specialized railways transporting ammunition and thousands of workers moving in a synchronized dance of industry. They were building a bridge of fire across the English Channel, a bridge that would remain invisible until the moment of impact. The choice of Mimoyecques was no accident. The site provided the perfect geological shield, a massive layer of chalk that was easy to tunnel into, but strong enough to mask the heat signatures and acoustic echoes of the great gun. From the surface, there was little to see but a few nondescript construction shacks and mounds of earth. Beneath the surface, however, was a labyrinth of 5 separate shafts, each intended to hold 5 barrels. 25 cannons in total, all pointed toward a single coordinate: Central London. The precision required was absolute. Because the barrels were fixed into the rock, they could not be aimed. They were preset, a permanent finger of steel pointing at the throat of an entire population. As the construction progressed, the atmosphere within the tunnels became increasingly claustrophobic. The pressure to complete the project was immense, driven by a leadership that saw the V3 as the final hope to turn the tide of a losing war. There are stories of men working in the flickering light of dim bulbs, the sound of drills echoing through the shafts like the heartbeat of a dying giant. The technical challenges were staggering. The timing of the secondary charges had to be perfect, down to the millisecond. If a single charge fired too early, the barrel would shatter. If too late, the shell would lose its momentum. It was a delicate, explosive choreography that pushed the limits of mid-century technology. The engineers were haunted by the knowledge that they were creating something that bypassed all traditional forms of warfare. While the world above remained largely unaware, the shadows of the V3 began to lengthen. Allied reconnaissance pilots began to notice strange activity in the French hills. Photographs showed massive railway tracks leading into the side of a hill and an unusual amount of concrete being transported to a site with no apparent purpose. The analysts at Medmenham pored over these images, sensing that something unnatural was growing beneath the soil. They did not know exactly what it was, but they knew it had to be stopped. The mystery of Mimoyecques became a priority, sparking a desperate race between the builders of the fortress and the bombers of the RAF. The dark brilliance of the V3 lay in its relentless nature. Unlike the V1 flying bomb or the V2 rocket, which could be intercepted or tracked, the shells of the V3 were too small and too fast to be stopped by any technology of the time. Once the first shot was fired, there would be no defense. London would have become a city under a permanent, unceasing barrage. The psychological impact would have been even more devastating than the physical destruction. A city that never knew when the next strike would land, coming from an enemy they could not see and a weapon they could not reach. It was the ultimate expression of long-distance terror, a way to bleed a population dry without ever setting foot on their shores. But the earth itself seemed to resist the weapon. The limestone, while easy to carve, proved to be a fickle ally. The vibrations from the test firings threatened to collapse the very tunnels they were housed in. Water seeped through the cracks, a constant weeping reminder of the world above. The engineers faced a struggle against gravity and friction, trying to keep the impossibly long barrels straight and true. Every meter of progress was a battle against the elements and the clock. The obsession with the supergun began to mirror the internal collapse of the regime that commissioned it, a grand, impossible vision that was slowly being crushed by the weight of its own complexity. Deep in the archives of the era, notes suggest that the builders were aware of the flaws. The multi-chamber ignition system often failed during trials. Barrels would leak or the charges would detonate prematurely, sending shrapnel through the testing facilities. Yet the orders from the top remained unchanged. Proceed at all costs. The V3 was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of a desperate refusal to accept reality. Thousands of forced laborers were moved to the site, their lives spent in the dark to fulfill a design that pushed human endurance to the breaking point. The tunnels were carved by hand and machine, inch by agonizing inch, as the Allied front drew closer with every passing day. In July 1944, the sky finally fell on Mimoyecques. The Allies unleashed the Tallboy bombs, 6-ton monsters designed to penetrate deep into the earth before exploding. These were not mere surface strikes, they were artificial earthquakes. The impact of the Tallboys sent shockwaves through the chalk, buckling the steel liners of the V3 shafts and collapsing the intricate support structures. The great gun was broken before it could fire its first shot at London. The dream of a trans-channel superweapon died in a cloud of dust and shattered concrete, buried under the very hills that were supposed to protect it. The ground, which had been hollowed out to harbor a monster, finally gave way under the pressure of its own weight and the violence from above. When the site was finally captured by Canadian forces, they were stunned by what they found. They descended into the dark, cold depths and discovered the skeletal remains of the 5 shafts. They saw the massive steel plates and the complex electrical systems that were meant to synchronize the fire. The sheer scale of the project was beyond anything they had imagined. It was not just a gun, it was a subterranean city dedicated to a single violent purpose. The silence of the captured tunnels was heavy with the realization of how close the project had come to completion. The barrels were installed, the shells were ready, and the target was only moments away from a catastrophe that never arrived. There is a lingering question that haunts the ruins of the V3 cannon. What if the timing had been different? If the construction had started 6 months earlier, or if the Allied intelligence had been a few weeks slower, the history of the European theater might have looked very different. The V3 represents the peak of an era where scientific advancement was inseparable from the desire for total destruction. It was a moment where the boundary between engineering and madness became blurred, where the physical limits of materials were pushed to the breaking point in the name of an ideological vision. The weapon was a ghost of a war that could have been even more devastating than the one we remember. Today, the Mimoyecques site is a museum, but it feels more like a mausoleum. Visitors can walk through a small portion of the tunnels, their footsteps echoing against the damp walls. The deeper levels remain flooded, swallowed by the groundwater that the engineers once fought so hard to keep at bay. These drowned chambers hold secrets that may never be fully recovered. Blueprints, tools, and the remnants of a technology that was both ahead of its time and fundamentally flawed. The water is dark and still, hiding the iron and steel that once promised to rain fire on a city across the horizon. It is a place where the weight of history is physically felt in the cold air. The story of the V3 is often overshadowed by its more famous siblings, the V1 and V2, but its legacy is perhaps more chilling. It represents the ultimate evolution of the siege engine, a weapon that removed the human element from the act of destruction. It was designed to be a machine that could kill by the hour, operated by a crew who would never see the smoke of their targets. This disconnection, this mechanical efficiency of death, is a hallmark of the dark thriller that was the mid-20th century. The ruins in France serve as a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often those we build ourselves, hidden in the dark places of the earth. Even after the war, the technology of the V3 did not entirely disappear. Its ghost reappeared decades later in the form of Project Babylon, another attempt to build a super gun capable of reaching across borders and oceans. The designer of that project, a brilliant but controversial engineer, seemed haunted by the same obsession that drove the creators of the V3. He too met a dark and mysterious end, his work left unfinished and his dreams buried. It suggests that there is something inherently seductive and dangerous about the idea of the perfect weapon, a siren song that draws minds into the depths of the earth and the shadows of history. The drive for a weapon that can reach further and hit harder seems to be a recurring nightmare in the human story. As the wind whistles through the concrete vents at Mimoyecques, it sounds almost like a sigh. The fortress remains a monument to a failed ambition, a massive, hollowed-out skull of a beast that never got to bite. It is a place of profound irony, a site built for the most violent of purposes that is now one of the quietest places on the continent. The trees have grown back over the bomb craters, and the birds sing in the woods where the Tallboys once fell. Nature is slowly reclaiming the concrete, cracking the foundations and filling the voids with life. The contrast between the peaceful surface and the violent intent of the tunnels below is a stark reminder of the duality of human nature. Yet, for those who know the history, the air around the hills of Landrethon-Lenore will always feel slightly different. There is a weight to the landscape, a knowledge of what lies beneath the grass and the wildflowers. The V3 was more than just a gun. It was a symptom of a world that had lost its way, a world where the brilliance of the human mind was turned toward the singular goal of annihilation. The tunnels are a physical manifestation of that darkness, a scar on the earth that reminds us of the fine line between greatness and ruin. It stands as a testament to the fact that engineering, when stripped of its humanity, becomes nothing more than a highly efficient way to build a tomb. The mystery of the V3 cannon is not in its mechanics, which are now well understood, but in the psychological landscape that allowed it to exist. It is a story of how far a group of people will go when they believe they are fighting for their survival, and how much of their own humanity they are willing to bury in the process. The subterranean fortress was a temple to a god of iron and fire. And though the god was never awakened, the temple remains cold and imposing. It is a testament to the fact that some secrets are best left in the dark, and some weapons are too terrible to ever be fired. The silence of the shafts is perhaps the most profound part of the story. In the end, the V3 remains a hypothesis of horror, a what-if, that continues to fascinate and disturb. It sits at the intersection of history and nightmare, a tangible piece of a past that feels like a dark work of fiction. As we look back at the jagged concrete and the flooded shafts, we are reminded that the true power of such a weapon lies not in its shells or its range, but in the shadow it casts over the future. The London Smasher was silenced before it could speak, but its silence is louder than any explosion could ever have been. It is the silence of a warning echoing through the tunnels and across the years, telling us to be wary of the monsters we build in the dark.